Hello, my name is Patrice Johnson, and I'm the Director of Partner Success for Medication Management Partners. I'm a pharmacist and a project manager, and over the last several months, I've studied and evaluated data to better understand COVID 19 and the vaccines pending approval. Like you, I've had people very close to me develop COVID 19, survive it, and unfortunately die from it. I'm committed to helping you to make an educated decision about receiving the vaccine. Today, we're going to go over some of the terminology used when discussing COVID and vaccines. We're going to talk about what to expect when receiving the vaccine and hopefully address your concerns about the vaccine. I'd like to start out by talking a bit about virus structure. Viruses are very simple entities, actually. There's really three parts. The genetic information, think of this as the recipe to make more of itself. The genetic information is what's here in the middle of the virus. Then there's the surrounding envelope. That membrane protects that genetic information or recipe. And then on the outer edges, you've got your spike protein or protein coat. Now, the way that viruses multiply is that they unlock the door to our cells and take over our cellular machinery to make more of the virus. So, those spike proteins, for instance, using this cross section of a coronavirus, are like hands that unlock the door to our cells. Since the virus can't replicate on its own, think of it like it doesn't have its own kitchen or groceries or stove to make a recipe. It's got to unlock the door to our house, use our groceries, our blender, our stove to make more of itself. So these spike proteins, as I said earlier, are what unlocks the door. You've probably heard the words antigens and antibodies more than you'd ever thought you'd hear in the year 2020. So let's take a moment to define them. An antigen is a substance that causes an immune response by the body. Antigens are found on the surface of the virus and are unique to that virus. When a virus enters the body, our body evaluates it. Is it harmful? Is it foreign? And then antibodies are a group of proteins produced by the immune system to counteract a specific antigen. So if you think of antigens as the hands that unlock the doors to our cells to allow viruses to enter our cells, hijack our machinery, and make more of the virus. Antibodies cover those hands. So, what you see in the illustration here on the left is those Y shaped or wishbone shaped figures, those are antibodies. Antibodies then inactivate the spike proteins on that virus so that they can't unlock the door to our cells and therefore can't replicate. And if they can't replicate, they can't make us sick. Here's an illustration of antibodies in action. What we want to see is plenty of those antibodies, those Y-shaped, wishbone-shaped groups of proteins attacking that virus, attaching to where those antigens, those spike proteins are, inactivating them so that those proteins, those spike proteins, can no longer open the door to our cells. If the virus can't open the door to our cells, it can't let in its genetic information or its recipe. It can't teach our host cells to make more of the virus. Therefore, we can't get sick from the virus when our antibodies are working well. Before I explain details on the COVID 19 vaccine, I'd like to share with you a bit about some of the different vaccines that have already been in use for years. Prior to development of mRNA vaccines, there were four main categories or methods for making vaccines: weakened or live vaccines, inactivated, subunit or conjugate, and toxoid vaccines. And although the first two COVID vaccines will be mRNA vaccines, which we'll discuss shortly, there are several other COVID vaccines that are currently in trials that are made using some of these existing methods that I'm going to talk about. So I want you to be able to understand what the differences are. So I'll just take a few minutes here to explain the different methods in making vaccines. So first, a weakened vaccine is one that's been treated in a way to reduce its virulence, yet allow it to still be able to provoke an immune response. So in a weakened vaccine, the virus is isolated and then it's grown in a way so that it makes it no longer good at replicating itself. I like to compare this to copying a document on a copier that's running low on toner or ink. As you make more copies, your print gets lighter and lighter. Although the lightest copy is still a sheet of paper, it shouldn't be used to make more copies. So that's how a weakened vaccine works. It still contains the virus, but that virus can no longer replicate at a level that can make you sick. It can, however, mount an immune response, which allows your body to build antibodies that would recognize that virus if you were affected with it in the future. Inactivated viruses have been treated with heat or a chemical, then purified to render them no longer able to replicate themselves, yet still cause an immune response. That would be like your flu vaccine, your rabies vaccine, your polio vaccines. Those are great examples of inactivated vaccines. Subunit or conjugate vaccines use the antigen. Remember, antigen is a piece of the surface of the virus. And so with subunit or conjugate vaccines, they use just a piece of that outer surface, a piece of the antigen, but not the genetic info, the part, that recipe that's inside the membrane of the virus. That's what's used to make a subunit or conjugate vaccine. This allows our immune system to recognize the antigen, build the antibodies, and prepare us if we come into contact with that virus in the future. Some of the other vaccines that are currently in trials for COVID-19 are going to be conjugate vaccines. So you'll see these show up more later in 2021. A great example of a subunit or conjugate vaccine is the shingles vaccine, which is highly effective. Toxoid vaccines are created to protect us against dangerous bacteria like diphtheria and tetanus. A toxoid vaccine takes the dangerous toxin or poison that's secreted by the bacteria, treats that toxin with heat or chemical to inactivate it, purifies that, and then places that toxoid in a vaccine to elicit an immune response. So as you can see here, there's a common theme. Every vaccine that's been created is designed to have our immune system respond and build antibodies. Now let's talk about mRNA vaccines. To help you understand this, let's first take another look at the virus. We've got the genetic information or the recipe to make more of the virus. We've got the membrane, the outer membrane, and then we've got that protein coating or the spike protein. Now, in making the vaccine, what they've done is taken just a component of the recipe, just a part of the genetic information, but just a part of that recipe is used to make the mRNA vaccine against COVID. The part that they've used is the part that makes the spike protein. By placing that recipe for the spike protein into a vaccine, our cells are given the instructions on how to make just the spike protein. Once our cells make the spike protein, then our bodies will recognize it as foreign, potentially harmful, and our immune systems will build antibodies against it. So again, notice that the vaccine only includes that part of the recipe to make the spike protein. It doesn't include the entire recipe. So by just having the instructions or the recipe to make that spike protein, again, our cells are going to make the spike protein. Our immune system will assess that spike protein, recognize it shouldn't be there, build these wonderful antibodies that will be available to us if we ever do come into contact with the SARS-CoV-2 virus. So, can you get COVID from the COVID vaccine? No. And it's important to understand that vaccination is not immediate immunization. All vaccines either present us with the antigen or teach us to make the antigen, which causes our immune system to spring into action and build antibodies. This takes time. So if you're exposed to SARS-CoV-2 virus, the virus that causes COVID-19 disease, if you're exposed to that virus right before you get the vaccine or shortly after you get the vaccine, you could still develop COVID-19 disease. Depending on the vaccine you get, it's going to take 7 to 14 days to build the strongest immunity against COVID-19. And that's 7 to 14 days after receiving that second injection. So it's important that when it comes to both the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine, you receive the first dose and the second dose. And then you can expect to have immunity built at the highest levels about 7 to 14 days later, depending on which particular virus or which particular vaccine you received. I'm often asked if there were shortcuts taken to get this vaccine made. The answer is no. For that reason, I want to take a minute to go over the process. The first step in creating a new vaccine is to identify the antigen. Remember the piece of the surface of the virus that is going to be recognized by the body and create an immune response. Identifying the antigen was done by scientists back on January 13th of 2020. mRNA technology was chosen by at least two drug companies as the most effective way to create a vaccine and the quickest, and so they began developing a product. Testing was done in animals, and then applications were filed to test the product in humans. Phase 1 trials with both of these manufacturers were conducted in what's typical 20 to 100 people to evaluate basic safety and identify the most common reactions. Phase 2 trials started shortly after Phase 1 and included several hundred participants, and those were used to determine the dose and frequency of the vaccine and what to expect. Towards the end of Phase 2 trials, Phase 3 trials began. Now, one of the things that was also going on during this time, we were learning more and more and more about this disease. We were learning that people of advanced age, people of color, and people with comorbid conditions like lung disease, heart disease, obesity, diabetes were likely to have very serious impact related to being infected with the SARS-CoV-2 virus. So we knew it was important to have people like that participate in these trials. So phase 3 trials for both Pfizer and Moderna included people from some of our most vulnerable age groups, ethnic backgrounds that were found to, really have challenges when getting this virus, and of different health statuses. The Pfizer trials included about 30% racially diverse participants, 10% African American, 13% Hispanic origin, and over 45% were 56 to 85 years old. The Moderna trial, 37% racially diverse, 10% African American, 20% Hispanic, Latinx, and over 23% were over 65 years old. Now, in the Pfizer trial, they did not study any participants. I'm sorry, in the Pfizer trial, they studied participants as young as 16 years old. In the Moderna trial, they studied participants as young as 18. So you'll notice later that there is a slight difference in the age group for each of these particular vaccines. It's also important to understand what an EUA means, or an emergency use authorization. Both the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine, as of this taping, have received EUA. So an EUA for a vaccine is based on the need to use a vaccine quickly to save lives during a public health emergency. As of this recording, over 324,000 people have died of this disease. That would be like the entire population of St. Louis or Cincinnati. So yes, this is a public health emergency. An EUA is a shorter process, but no steps are skipped in ensuring the safety and efficacy of the vaccines, as I shared earlier. And when granting the EUA, the FDA is really assessing if the vaccine's known and potential benefits outweigh the known and potential risk of the disease that it's being used to immunize people against. and there was staggering evidence that these vaccines would help to get us out of this pandemic. So absolutely, they both have received approval, and we expect more to receive approval over the coming year. So quickly to compare the two vaccines, the Pfizer vaccine is a zero point 0.3 milliliter dose. Two doses are required. The first one, day one, and then 21 days later, the second dose. The Pfizer vaccine is approved for 16 years and older. It does require ultra cold storage, which you've likely heard about, and lasting protection against the virus is created about 7 days after that second step of dosing. The Moderna vaccine is a zero point 0.5 milliliter dose. Still, two doses are required 28 days apart, so day one and day 29. It's approved for people over 18, so notice the difference there between that and the Pfizer. Again, Moderna vaccine was not studied in people under 18. Regular freezer storage and lasting protection or antibodies that guarantee that 95% effectiveness for the vaccine is expected about 7 to 14 days after the second step of dosing. So there are more vaccines to come, but these are the two that we have available to us today. So who should not get the vaccine? Well, the only contraindications are patients who have had a severe allergic reaction after a previous dose of COVID-19 vaccine, or patients who have had a severe allergic reaction to any ingredient of this vaccine. In order for us to get to the other side of this pandemic, we're going to need to attain vaccination rates that are over 70%. And so I've used a illustration here from an Australian journal to show what it currently looks like with having very few people immune to COVID. First, if there's 2 people that are infected in the group, they can infect as many as 10 people around them. And so we end up with the pandemic situation that we're in with so many people coming down with the infection. If a few of the people in the population, say 10%, are immunized because they've either already had COVID or they receive a vaccine, still you put 2 infected people in that group, we still end up with a large infection rate of infection. But if you can immunize 70 to 80% of the population, now you put those same 2 people in a large group and the impact is very minor. This is why we want to get to vaccination rates over 70%. If you're wondering what should you expect when you get the vaccine? Well, the vaccine, as I said before, cannot give you COVID-19, but you can expect to have some short-term discomfort, fatigue, headache, muscle ache, chills, fever, tenderness at the injection site after vaccination. This is very common with receiving any vaccine. These reactions will last about 24 to 48 hours. They usually show up about 24 hours after receiving the vaccine, and they dissipate on their own about 48 hours later. Again, these symptoms are ones that are showing that your body is actually responding to the vaccine. Your immune system has been alerted and your immune system is in action to start building those antibodies. So these are symptoms associated with an immune response. They're normal, they're common, and they should be expected. So let's address some other common questions that come up about these vaccines. First, how do we know the vaccine is effective and safe? Well, in addition to all of the data that has been reviewed by scientists for phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 trials during the development of these vaccines, we've also got the independent advisory panels, the ACIP, the Vaccine and Related Biological Products Advisory Panel that have reviewed this data and been able to show that it is safe and effective. So how about when and how long will I be protected? As of right now, because this virus is so new, it's only been around here in the States for less than a year, we are not sure how long antibodies will last. We just don't have enough data because the virus is so young. As I said, we've only been dealing with it for about a year. So right now we know that antibodies last at least 3 months. We're expecting to get more data on that as we continue to study and continue to monitor. This may end up being the type of vaccine that we get once a year. We just don't know yet. We do know that right now we need vaccination rates over 70% in this pandemic. Will I still need to wear a mask? Yes. Yes, you will. Until we reach high vaccination rates, as I discussed just a few slides ago, we will need to continue to social distance, wear a mask until we can, one, get the pandemic under control, but also understand infectivity with the vaccine. So we know that the vaccine will keep you from getting sick if you've received the vaccine, received both doses, and waited that full waiting period for immunity. But we are not sure yet if you could still infect someone else if you're exposed to it. And so, for that reason, we will continue to wear masks until we've got a much larger amount of the population immunized against the disease. What if I've already had COVID-19? If you've already had COVID-19 and you're not currently, battling the infection, you are a perfect candidate to receive the vaccine. It's perfectly fine for you to get the vaccine, and I'd still recommend you do so. Is it safe for pregnant or nursing women to take the vaccine? Yes, it is. The American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology has provided a statement. You can go to their website and see more information about that, stating that pregnant or nursing women should not be kept from getting the vaccine. They should get the vaccine when it's appropriate based on the way the vaccine is rolled out in phases. And where should I look to get more accurate or additional information? On this next slide, I'll show you a couple of resources that are very helpful. I've listed here a few great resources. The Pfizer and Moderna websites both have information for residents and family, and they have information specific to healthcare providers. And then the CDC, their website has quite a bit of information about all vaccines, but also information for the general public on what to expect with receiving vaccines and information about how they work. Great resources. So in order for us to get on the other side of this pandemic, we're going to need to continue to protect ourselves and others by using every tool in the shed. We've got to continue to wear a mask. We've got to continue to social distance, continue to wash our hands and use sanitizer when hand washing isn't available. We've got to quarantine when required and get vaccinated, both shots. That's our best chance at getting on the other side of this pandemic. I want to thank you for the time that you've spent with me today, and I hope that you found this information helpful.